A child can live in a house full of provisions and still absorb a devastating message. I am acceptable, but I am not especially wanted. That message is rarely spoken plainly. It arrives through atmosphere, through the parent who handles every responsibility but never softens when the child enters the room, through the look that says, "Not now," before the child has finished the first sentence, through the jokes that feel like irritation in costume, through a family life where the child is corrected, transported, scheduled, fed, and protected, but seldom truly received. This is what many children mean, without knowing the language for it, when they grow up feeling merely tolerated. Not abused, not abandoned, not unloved in any simple sense. Managed, endured, accommodated. Their existence creates duty, not delight. And children can tell the difference long before adults are willing to admit that the difference matters. Parents understandably resist this idea because it sounds sentimental, even accusatory. They think, "I am doing everything. I am exhausted. I am paying attention to their future. I am sacrificing constantly." And all of that may be true. But children are not asking only whether sacrifice is occurring. They are asking something subtler and more developmentally important. What is my emotional status in this home? Am I a source of life, amusement, curiosity, and pleasure for the people who care for me? Or am I primarily a source of tasks, noise, interruption, expense, and management? Adults often assume children cannot perceive this because it is too nuanced. In reality, children are specialists in emotional climate. Their survival depends on it. They study tone, tempo, posture, glance, the tiny delay before you answer, the kind of smile that belongs to affection, and the kind that belongs to restraint. They are reading you constantly. That is why delight matters so much. Not performative enthusiasm, not endless praise, not the artificial brightness that children can smell from a mile away. Real delight. The kind that appears in your face before you have time to choreograph it. The laugh that is not strategic. The follow-up question that tells the child you actually entered the strange world they just offered you. The pause where you let their fascination exist without editing it into usefulness. Delight tells a child, perhaps more clearly than any compliment can, that their presence can generate warmth instead of weariness. And when a child feels that repeatedly, something profound forms. They begin to associate visibility with safety. They stop assuming they have to shrink, entertain, excel, or self-manage in order to remain pleasant enough for closeness. They internalize a simpler truth. I can take up ordinary human space and still be welcome. Its opposite is subtle but brutal. The tolerated child often becomes an amateur in self-contraction. They talk fast, so they do not hold the room too long. They pre-cancel their own needs. They ask, "Are you busy?" before saying anything that might require attention. They become very alert to whether the household is emotionally overdrawn. If the parent is tired, the child edits themselves. If the parent is stressed, the child goes quiet. If the parent is in a good mood, the child hurries to speak before the window closes. None of this looks dramatic from the outside. In fact, it often looks like an unusually considerate child. That is one reason the pattern goes unnoticed. Adults praise children for adapting to emotional scarcity because the adaptation is convenient. What they do not see is how much future loneliness is being built under the surface. Consider how easily family life teaches this lesson through technology alone. The child approaches with a story. The parent says, "Yeah, go on," while still looking at the screen. The child keeps talking and watches the parent nod at irregular intervals. At some point, the child realizes the content is not really entering. What lands there is not simply disappointment. It is calibration. My story did not justify full attention. Multiply that by years, and the child stops bringing as much. Not because they no longer want connection, but because they have updated their expectations about how much of themselves the room can hold. Adults later misread this as maturity, independence, or a preference for privacy. Often, it is an economy of hope. The child has learned not to spend bids for connection where returns are poor. There is a reason this can shape adult life so deeply. Children do not merely collect experiences, they build predictions. If your early environment repeatedly taught you that your existence tended to create strain, you grow up expecting strain to be the hidden price of closeness. You become careful with joy because joy attracts attention. You become careful with sadness because sadness draws sighs. You become careful with excitement because excitement might be too much. You become careful with ordinary presence because you can feel how quickly ordinary presence becomes interruption. Then one day you are an adult who cannot understand why intimacy feels effortful, even with kind people. Why do you apologize for speaking? Why do you panic after sending a simple text? Why does genuine interest from another person feel strangely suspicious or moving? Often because somewhere in childhood, your nervous system learned that being around you was something others endured. Parents do not usually intend this. Some are simply depleted. Others were raised in families where practical care counted as love, and enjoyment of children was considered optional, foolish, or even indulgent. Some associate delight with permissiveness and think seriousness proves devotion. Others are so anxious about getting parenting right that every interaction turns into supervision, correction, or educational optimization. The child becomes a project under management. Have you done your homework? Did you wash? Why is your room like this? What happened at school? Did you say thank you? How long were you on your phone? Again, none of these questions are wrong. The issue is ratio. If the child mostly experiences you as a manager, they will eventually relate to you as one. Management can keep a household functioning. It cannot, by itself, make a child feel cherished. This distinction becomes especially important during middle childhood and adolescence, when children stop asking for delight directly and start testing for it indirectly. They bring you the bizarre meme, the half-finished song, the overcomplicated game lore, the opinion they barely understand, the outfit they are not sure they can carry, the story that contains too much detail and too little point. Adults often think the child is seeking approval for the content. Often the child is checking for something else. Can my oddness live here without immediate embarrassment? If the parent responds with coolness, mockery, or administrative impatience, the child often learns to split off the most alive parts of themselves from family life. The household keeps the edited version. The real self goes elsewhere or nowhere. And then parents get confused later. The teenager is polite but opaque, cooperative but unreachable. In the house, they are quiet, low drama, efficient. Outside the house, they come alive with peers, online worlds, hobbies, or secret parts of themselves the family never really gets to know. Parents call this normal individuation, and some of it is. But sometimes it is something sadder. The child has concluded that the family can handle behavior, logistics, maybe even achievement, but not their unedited humanity. So they keep the peace and take the self elsewhere. That is not rebellion. It is relational budgeting. They are spending their realness where it appears to earn a better return. The remedy is not complicated, but it is demanding because it requires a parent to become less efficient in the right ways. It means joining the child's interest for a minute before evaluating it. It means letting your face relax when they appear. It means listening to something unimportant as though the person saying it is important. It means allowing small inefficiencies to become emotional investments. Children often do not need hours of quality time nearly as much as they need evidence that their bids for connection are not routinely treated as annoying side quests. A real laugh. A question asked in good faith. The phone put down. The willingness to be interrupted without making the interruption feel like dead. These gestures are small enough to be missed by adults and large enough to reorganize a child's sense of belonging. It is also important to understand that limits and delight are not enemies. Some parents withdraw warmth when correcting because they fear that being emotionally available during discipline weakens authority. In reality, children digest limits far better when they are confident that irritation is not the whole relationship. A child who feels welcomed can survive disappointment without immediately translating it into, "I am too much." A child who feels merely tolerated often experiences every correction as confirmation. Of course I'm the problem. Of course I'm exhausting. Of course I should have taken up less space. This is why the emotional foundation matters. It changes what discipline means. If you were tolerated more than welcomed, you may recognize the adult consequences in yourself. The reflex to make yourself easy. The embarrassment after saying something enthusiastic. The way you can feel guilty simply for needing company. The suspicion that love is available, but enjoyment is reserved for other, lighter, less burdensome people. You may become a perfect employee, a careful friend, a low-maintenance partner, all while carrying a private ache you cannot quite explain. That ache often comes from one missing assurance. Not merely that someone would care for you, but that someone was genuinely glad you were there. If you are raising children now, the question is not whether you occasionally get tired, impatient, distracted, or emotionally thin. Of course you do. The question is what your child would honestly say is the emotional theme of your presence. Do they experience you as mostly relieved by their compliance and mostly strained by their aliveness? Or do they have enough evidence that you can enjoy them in their ordinary, inconvenient humanity? If this matters to you, subscribe. This channel is for people who want to understand what families communicate beneath the surface of rules and routines. And send this video to one close person you care about. Someone with whom you want to build healthier, more thoughtful relationships around the children in your lives. Shared understanding makes better homes possible. Because children do not need to feel entertained at all times. They do not need parents who are endlessly delighted performers. They need something steadier and far more believable. The recurring sense that they are not a burden passing through the room, but a person whose presence can create warmth there. That feeling becomes confidence. It becomes honesty. It becomes a different style of intimacy later in life. And its absence becomes something just as durable. So much of what children carry into adulthood begins with this almost invisible lesson. When I show up as myself, do the people who love me seem secretly sorry I did? A revealing place to watch for this is after the child has done nothing wrong. Not after misbehavior, not during stress, not when you are forced into parenting mode. What is your face like when the child simply arrives? If it is usually neutral, compressed, hurried, or already anticipating management, the child will feel that. If warmth appears only after achievement, helpfulness, or charming behavior, the child will feel that too. Children are not making philosophical distinctions. They are drawing practical conclusions. I am easiest to love when I require less. I am most enjoyable when I entertain or succeed. I should save the messy parts for private. Those conclusions shape the entire emotional strategy of a person's life. This is one reason delight can feel almost medicinal in a home that has leaned too hard into management. Delight interrupts the child's prediction that contact equals burden. It does not need to be grand. It can be as simple as letting their joke actually land, asking them to tell you more about the thing you would never have chosen yourself, noticing the expression on their face and responding before they ask, or saying their name in a tone that contains pleasure instead of only instruction. In developmental terms, these moments help the child build what might be called social confidence at the source. Not confidence that they are always successful, but confidence that they are fundamentally receivable, that they do not contaminate the room by entering it. And if a parent notices that this has not been the child's experience, repair is possible precisely because the signals are small. Small things can be repeated. Small things can become culture. More eye contact that is not corrective. More undivided attention in the first 30 seconds of contact. More curiosity that does not immediately convert into teaching. More ordinary enjoyment. Over time, children trust repetition more than apology. They start to believe the room has changed when the room keeps feeling different. That is how a tolerated child starts to become a welcomed one. Not through speeches about love, but through the steady emotional evidence that being themselves no longer seems to cost so much. The deeper truth is that children borrow their first sense of social desirability from home. Not romantic desirability, of course, but the basic conviction that their presence can be met with gladness instead of tolerance. When that conviction is strong, they move into friendships, classrooms, and later adult relationships with less anticipatory shame. When it is weak, they often overcompensate. They become funny, indispensable, brilliant, or nearly invisible. Anything but simply present. That is why this issue matters far beyond childhood mood. It touches how a person negotiates belonging for decades. So before the next correction, the next reminder, the next logistical question, it is worth pausing over a simpler task. Let your child feel, in some ordinary and credible way, that you are not just committed to them, you are pleased by them. That knowledge is one of the quiet foundations on which a stable self is built. And when that foundation exists, the child is less likely to spend adulthood auditioning for warmth that should have felt native from the beginning. They do not have to keep proving they are easy enough to keep. They already know closeness can include them as they are. That knowledge changes almost everything downstream. Quietly,